you are carried gently into the long, slow story of Egypt, drifting along the banks of the oldest river in the world. There is nothing to hold onto, and nothing to hurry toward. Before the story begins, let the warmth of this ancient valley settle around you. Picture the night sky above the Nile, wide and very still, dusted with stars that have watched over this river for thousands of years. Breathe in slowly now, drawing that warm, soft air deep into your chest. Feel it settle quietly inside you. Now breathe out, even more slowly than you breathed in. And as the breath leaves you, let your shoulders fall a little lower. Breathe in again, gently, as if drawing in the sweet, dark smell of the river's salt after the flood is gone. And breathe out slowly, slowly, letting your whole body grow heavier against whatever holds you now. Your eyes are already growing soft. Let them close a little more with each breath. Breathe in one last time, quietly and without effort, feeling the warm night air of the valley move through you. And breathe out, long and slow, until there is nothing left to release. You are here, resting at the very edge of something very old. The river flows on beside you, and the story comes now, gently, long ago, before the word Egypt existed, before anyone had named this valley or counted its years. The river did what it had always done. Each summer, the Nile rose. You can imagine it, the water creeping slowly over its banks, spreading wide and still across the flat land on either side. It moved without hurry. It covered the ground the way sleep covers a tired mind, quietly, completely, without effort. For weeks, the valley lay beneath the river. The water was warm and brown and rich with something the current had carried all the way from the far green mountains in the south, from the high plateaus where rain fell softly and streams ran full. And then, as summer softened into autumn, the water began to pull back. You can see it happening. The river drawing itself in, retreating slowly toward its center, uncovering the land again foot by gentle foot. What it left behind was extraordinary. The soil that emerged from the water was dark, almost black and soft, and it held the warmth of the afternoon sun very quickly. It was not the pale desert sand that stretched away on either side, dry and without mercy. It was something else entirely, something alive, rich with minerals, carried all the way down from the distant mountains, laid out across the valley floor like a gift that asked nothing in return. People were already living along the edges of this valley. They had been here for a long time, moving with the seasons, finding what the land offered. They gathered seeds from the grasses that grew in the soft margins way you understand the rhythm of your own breathing, not by thinking about it, but by living inside it long enough that it becomes part of you. And one season, some of them did something new. They pressed seeds into the damp, dark soil the river had left behind. They pressed them in gently with their fingers, or with smooth sticks worn soft from use, and they stepped back, and they waited. The seeds did not disappoint them. In the weeks that followed, the ground grew green. Thin shoots of emmer wheat pushed up through the dark earth, pale at first, then deepening into a soft, full color. Barley rose in quiet rows. The warmth of the sun fell over everything evenly, and the soil, still holding the moisture of the flood deep within it, kept the roots fed without effort. There was almost nothing to do but watch it grow and rest and feel the slow satisfaction of that watching. The people stayed close to these fields. They built small shelters on the higher ground near the river's edge. Simple structures of woven reeds plastered with cool mud, low and shaded inside. A few families at first, then a few more, drawn by the same rhythm, the same quiet abundance. They found that staying in one place through the growing season was not a hardship. The river kept its promise every year. The flood came, and then it receded, and then the earth was ready again. The pattern held. You might imagine one of those early mornings, the sun not yet fully risen, the air still carrying the soft cool of the night before. A woman walks barefoot through the dark earth between the rows of wheat. The stalks reach up to her knee, swaying very faintly in the first breath of morning. She runs her fingers along the tops of them, feeling the grain forming inside the husks, dense and promising. Behind her, a child follows quietly in her footsteps, placing each small foot carefully in the prints she has left. The river glints in the low, pale light, not far away, moving without sound, already drawing down slowly toward its dry season level. She does not think about what comes next. She thinks only about this row and the next one and the stillness of the morning around her. In time, the shelters became sturdier, built to last more than one season. The families became small villages. People learned which seeds grew best in which parts of the soil, which crops could be stored through the dry months, how to weave baskets deep enough to hold the harvest, and how to seal clay jars so the grain stayed dry. They began to shape small channels in the earth to lead the floodwater a little farther into the fields, coaxing the river's gift just a little deeper. They shaped the land gently, working with it as they would work with any patient, generous thing. The river gave, and they received, and in the receiving gradually became something new. This was not a sudden change. It moved the way the flood moved, slowly, steadily, without drama. 1 year gave way to the next. 1 generation passed its knowledge to the one that followed. The way a parent places a warm cloth into a child's hands, quietly, without ceremony, simply because it is needed. And at this time, the black land grew a little larger each season, a little more tended, a little more known. The desert still stretched away on both sides, pale and enormous and impossibly still. But between the 2 deserts, something was waking softly and without hurry into what the whole world would one day marvel at. And you rest here now, at the very beginning of it all, in the warmth of the valley, close to the sound of the slow, moving water. The night is gentle around you, and the earth below is dark and full, and there is nothing more you need tonight. The stone remembers everything. That is what the old one said in the time when the desert was still learning its own silence, and the people who had long tended the black soil began to look upward, toward the pale cliffs and the sky beyond them. You are resting in that world now. It is a world of dust and deep patience, of hands worn smooth by work and sunlight, of men and women who slept each night under stars so bright they seemed to press down gently on the earth. The plateau rises at the edge of the desert, not far from the slow green water, but far enough that the sand here is dry and pale, almost silver in the early morning. Great limestone blocks sit in rough rows, cut from the earth by copper tools and human will, each one heavier than a dozen oxen, each one moved by ropes and water and the coordinated breath of hundreds. You do not need to lift anything tonight. You are simply watching from somewhere very still as the light changes and the work unfolds. The builders wake before the sun does. They rise from low mud brick dormitories built in neat rows near the plateau's edge, drinking water from wide clay jars, eating bread that someone baked in the dark hours of the morning. There is a calm efficiency to it all, an unhurried rhythm, like water finding its way down through stone over centuries. They do not hurry. Hurry would be wrong. The work is too large, too permanent to be rushed, and so each man takes up his role with a kind of settled certainty. The certainty of someone who knows his task will outlast him by 1,000 years. You feel that certainty settle over you now, soft and wide. The foremen mark the stone with red ochre, gentle lines and figures that guide each cut. Skilled masons lower their copper chisels and tap, tap, tap in a slow and measured rhythm that echoes across the plateau in the cool morning air. each stripe fine white powder that drifts in the slant of early sun, catching the light and glowing briefly before it falls. Limestone dust has a particular smell, dry and mineral, faintly choppy, clean in a way that belongs only to deep stone, newly open to air. You notice it drifting toward you on a gentle desert wind. It settles on your skin like powder, soft as flour, carrying a coolness from the rock's interior, something the stone has kept close for a very long time. The sledges move. Great wooden runners pulled across wet sand and clay, each one loaded with a block that will become part of something the builders themselves may never fully see. A man pours water ahead of the sledge so the sand compresses and the runners glide. Another leans his weight against a rope as thick as his arm. The motion is steady and deliberate, the pace of a slow tide. You watch all of this from a restful distance. At midday, the workers pause. They sit in the shadows of half-built walls and unfinished courses of stone, eating dried fish and bread, drinking beer that is thick and mild and good. The foremen sit with them. The architects sit nearby, their papyrus scrolls rolled and tucked away, their eyes closed in the heat. Everyone rests the same way in the afternoon sun. The work can wait. The stone will not go anywhere. The plateau holds the heat, but also the silence. High above, a falcon tilts its wings and rides a current of air with absolute ease, without effort, without urgency. You watch it go. It shrinks to a dark point against the pale sky, and then it is gone, and the silence returns, full and soft. By late afternoon, the shadows are long and blue across the stone. The light turns amber, and the great unfinished structure catches it along every edge, every course of blocks glowing gold against the deepening sky. Even incomplete, it is enormous, even still being built. It is certain of itself, as though it already knows the shape it is becoming. The workers gather their tools. They walk back to their dormitories in loose groups, talking quietly, their voices carrying that low murmur of people who have done something real with their bodies and are satisfied by it. Children run to meet something. Fires are lit. The smell of roasting grain drifts out across the sand. The plateau darkens gently. You do not need to follow anyone home tonight. You can stay here, in this still place between the stone and the stars, and let the air cool around you. It cools quickly in the desert, the heat of the day slipping away in a short while, leaving something clear and light in its place. The stars come, as they always do here, slowly, and then all at once. The builders know these stars well. aligned their great structures to the sky with a care that is almost tender, turning stone to face the exact point a particular star rises, honoring the heavens by making the earth answer them. You are lying under those same stars now. They do not demand anything of you. They simply shine, cold and ancient and steady, and you can feel their light as something gentle on your face, the way moonlight feels when it comes through a window in a quiet room. The men who carved and hauled and measured dreamed each night in their low rooms. Their dreams were probably quiet ones, simple things, the sound of water, the smell of bread, the particular feel of a mallet in a familiar hand, the faces of people they loved. Their sleep was deep, earned by labor, carrying no complicated weight. One generation poured its life into the stone and then rested. Another came after and continued, adding course upon course, year upon year, the structure rising in a great slow accumulation over decades. The work gathered itself the way years gather, quietly, without drama. Each season like every other, and all of them adding up to something that would last. You feel yourself sinking into that same accumulation. The heaviness of good work, the satisfaction of stone placed true and level. Nothing needs to be solved tonight. Nothing remains unfinished in the part of the world you are resting in. The dust has settled, the tools are put away. The plateau is quiet under the stars, and the great pale structure stands in the moonlight, patient and immovable, casting a shadow so long it seems to reach across centuries. The way sleep reaches across a whole night, covering everything. Everything here has been done carefully. Everything here will endure, and you are held in that endurance now, gently, without effort. The way the stone holds its own weight, the way the desert holds its own silence, the way the night holds everything in its cool and steady arms. The night comes slowly over the old land, settling like fine silk across the rooftops, across the temple courtyards, across the open palms of carved stone gods, whose eyes have watched every era arrive and drift away without hurry. You are resting now somewhere between one dynasty and the next, in that soft, in-between hour when the torches burn low, and the smoke rises in quiet columns toward the painted ceilings above. There are palaces here. Long, cool corridors carry a faint scent of cedar oil and incense ground from tree bark brought from faraway coasts. The floors are smooth and pale, inlaid with blue veined tiles that catch the torchlight and send it rippling along the walls in slow, easy waves. A pharaoh walks these halls sometimes in the deep of night, barefoot, attended by 2 or 3 servants who move without sound. His shoulders carry the weight of many harvests, many flood seasons, many mornings in which he stood before the court, and let the golden collar settle on his chest like a second skin. He rules, and he has always ruled, and the land around him seems to breathe in agreement, the way a sleeping body breathes, slowly, evenly, without effort. But there are also priests. They have been here longer than he has. They were here before his father, and before his grandfather, and before all the names carved into the stone stele that leans slightly now in the temple forecourts, worn soft by centuries of Nile wind. The priests rise before dawn and carry their lamps into the innermost sanctuaries. The great gods live in gilded wood and painted plaster. They wash the god's face with cool water carried in alabaster bowls. They lay out food. They chant in low voices that pool in the dark corners and seem to linger there for hours after the singing has stopped. They know the rituals so completely that the words have become part of the air itself, indistinguishable from the cool breath that moves through the stone passages at the turning of each night. Power in this old land is not a single thing. It is not held in one pair of hands the way a lamp is held. It moves gently between the palace and the temple, between the throne room and the inner sanctuary. The way heat moves through stone, slowly and invisibly, until one surface is warm and another has cooled without anyone noticing when the change occurred. You settle a little deeper now, and the scene drifts with you. A new pharaoh has come. He is younger, and his eyes are bright, and his voice carries easily across the great hypostyle hall, where the priests stand in rows between the columns. He makes offerings. He bows his head with genuine reverence, because he was raised to understand that the gods are older than any throne, older than any crown, older even than the land's own memory of itself. The head priest receives these offerings with calm hands, with a slight incline of the shaved head, with the patient courtesy of someone who has seen this particular ceremony many times before and expects to see it many times again. There is no argument between them. That is the quiet truth of it. The transfer of weight happens not in conflict, but in ceremony, in the slow layering of one gesture over another. The way sediment layers itself on the riverbed, adding depth without disturbing what came before. Torches line the walls of the inner court. They are made from twisted linen, soaked in fat, and they give a soft amber glow that makes everything look ancient and gentle at once. The carved hieroglyphs, the painted eyes of the gods, the linen robes the priests moving in the faint air. The smoke from these torches curls upward past painted vultures and cobras, and the disk of the sun, past all the recorded victories of all the pharaohs who have ever stood in this same room, and it disappears eventually into the dark above the columns where no light quite reaches. A scribe sits in a corner making notes on papyrus, recording the details of the ceremony for those many generations ahead, who will read these words in rooms that do not yet exist, in a language that will take centuries more to fully form. You are drifting, and the torchlight drifts with you in the years that follow. The priests grow prosperous. Their temple estates spread outward from the great sanctuary complexes, fields of emerald wheat and orchards of sycamore figs, tended by workers who answer not to the crown, but to the high priest's household. The granaries of Ammon at Karnak hold more grain than many smaller kingdoms have ever seen. The priests do not raise armies over this wealth. They simply tend it quietly, the way a gardener tends a garden that has been growing in good soil for a very long time, letting the deep roots do what deep roots always do. And the pharaoh, even a strong one, knows that this is the nature of the land he governs. He is the sun at the center of the world, yes. Every inscription on every wall says so. But the priests have the ear of the sun's own father, and that is a different kind of authority entirely. Older and more patient, rooted in something that does not change with the seasons, or the rising of new kings from distant provinces, generations pass, one settling over another like the thin veils of linen draped over a sleeping figure. A great warrior king builds monuments in the north. A scholar king quietly expands the library of the temple. A young king, barely past childhood, holds court in a hall so enormous that his small figure almost disappears among the columns, and the priests around him move gently, guiding without pulling, advising without commanding, keeping the old ceremonies intact with the care of people who understand that ceremony is what holds the land together, more surely than any wall or garrison. Each ear carries its own quiet fullness. Ordinary days fill it up. The smell of bread baking near the palace kitchens before dawn. The sound of reed sandals on cool stone, the particular silence that settles over a sanctuary just after the final prayer has been spoken and the lamps have been trimmed and the god has been left to rest behind his closed door. A tenderness passes from one generation to the next without announcement, simply by proximity, simply by watching and growing old in the same courtyards where one's teachers grew old before. You are held by this now, by the long, unhurried continuity of it, by the understanding that even great empires have quiet hours, have evenings, have moments when the torches burn down to their last glow, and the priests fold their robes, and the pharaoh sits alone in an uncarved room, and listens to the dark river moving outside, patient and full of all the time in the world. The land does not rush. It never has. It holds each ear gently, lets it lie, lets it grow soft at the edges, lets it pass into the long memory that the stones keep so faithfully and so well. And you are held here too, in that same gentleness, in that same unhurried dark, somewhere between one breath and the next, somewhere between one era and the quiet that comes after. Centuries settle over the land like fine dust settling over stone. New voices arrive at the edge of the water, voices shaped by a different sun, carrying different names for the same gods. Greek ships move through the northern mouths of the river, their sails pale against the wide, flat sky. The men who step ashore are curious and careful, the way only travelers far from home can be, and they stand a moment at the riverbank, watching the brown water move south to north, unhurried as it has always moved. They bring with them a spire. It is a simple thing, a wooden helix fitted inside a tilted cylinder, turned by a hand at the top, and as it turns, water rises. You can almost hear it now, that soft, rhythmic churning, the wet music of water climbing wood, lifting itself against all instinct, moving upward toward the waiting fields. Farmers watch from the bank, their own shadowed poles still resting in the mud nearby, and after a little while, they reach out and touch the wooden spire with curious fingers, learning its grain the way you learn anything worth knowing, slowly, with quiet attention. This is the Archimedes screw, though no one calls it that yet. It belongs to a moment before it belongs to a name. It is simply a tool, and it does its work, and water moves where water is needed, and the fields drink, and the grain rises, and everyone who watches is satisfied in the same way, regardless of which language they speak when they look up at the sky. Alexandria grows at the northern edge of the land, where the river opens into many mouths before it meets the sea. You are there now in that city, and it is gentler than you might imagine. The streets are wide and white in the afternoon heat, but the night here is soft and carries the smell of salt from the harbor and the smell of papyrus from the library, that great warehouse of written thought, its rooms full of scrolls from every civilization, that has ever found reason to scratch words onto something thin. Lamps burn low inside, and scholars sit with their heads bent, and the silence around them is the particular silence of deep concentration, which is not so different from the silence of deep sleep. The gods here have merged and softened. Isis has a Greek face now, and Serapis stands tall in marble, an Egyptian soul dressed in Greek form. No one seems troubled by this. Belief is a flexible thing, and people have always known that holiness belongs to no single shape. Children grow up praying to the same sacred presences their grandparents prayed to, even when the statues look different, even when the words are in a different tongue. The heart's devotion does not need a dictionary. The Ptolemies ruled for nearly 3 centuries, and beneath their rule, the land continues its old rhythms. Farmers still read the flood. Priests still tend the temples with careful hands. The river does what it has always done, feeding everything on either side without preference, without memory, without need for recognition. Then the Romans arrive, and they arrive the way large things arrive, all at once and with great noise. But the noise fades, as all noise does, and what remains afterward is something quieter. Roman engineers walked the length of the canals with measuring ropes and wooden stakes. They are practical men, fond of systems, fond of straight lines, and they look at the old irrigation channels with their professional eyes and begin to rebuild, to redirect, to improve. The canals grow deeper in places, wider in others. New gates control the flow of water into side channels. The fields at the edge of the desert receive water they have never tasted before, and in those newly wet places, roots find their way down into dark soil, and green things appear. You watch a Roman soldier standing at the edge of a newly dug channel, his helmet catching the low morning sun. He is not thinking about empire. He is watching a water wheel turn. It is a large wooden wheel fixed in the current of a side canal, its paddles catching the moving water, the wheel turning slowly and lifting small clay pots chained to its rim, each pot scooping water at the bottom and tipping it gently into an upper channel at the top. It is a patient, endless motion, and the soldier watches it the way anyone watches something that moves without effort, with a kind of grateful ease. The peasants who work these fields have watched many rulers come and go. They have learned that the river does not change with the politics of the capital. Floods arrive, or they do not. Grain grows, or it struggles. What matters is the water, and who tends it, and how carefully the ditches are kept clear. A man say tax in any language. He has always known what it means to stand knee-deep in black mud, coaxing water toward thirsty roots. Night comes to Roman Egypt the same way it has always come, slowly from the east, the sky deepening from pale gold to copper to the particular deep blue that belongs to the hour just before full dark. Fires appear in village doorways. The smell of bread and oil drifts across the fields. Children who were born to Greek mothers and Egyptian fathers, or Egyptian mothers and Roman fathers, or any combination the years have made possible, sit at the edges of things, looking at the first stars, feeling the day's heat ease out of the air around them. You are among them, quiet and unhurried, and the ground beneath you holds the memory of every foot that has ever pressed into it, every seed ever planted, every drop of river water ever lifted and carried and laid down again. The land has no urgency. It has held so many stories that it has learned to hold them lightly, the way deep water holds a stone, without effort, without strain. The stone simply rests there, and the water holds it, and neither is troubled by the arrangement. Time moves the way water moves here, by finding the lowest path, the most natural way forward, never forcing, never hurrying. One era gives way to the next the way late afternoon gives way to evening, so gradually that you cannot say exactly when the change happened, only that it did, and that the sky is different now, and softer, and the light has become something you could sleep inside. The flood does not announce its leaving. It simply begins to feel like memory, like something half remembered from a long and restful sleep. The mud that was once the river's gift dries slowly, cracking into pale geometric shapes, each tile of earth curling gently at its corners, like a page read so many times it has learned to turn itself. You watch this happen without hurry. The land is patient with its own forgetting. Seasons pass the way water passes through sand, quietly, without drama. The fields that once bloomed dark and heavy begin to pale their margins. The irrigation ditches that carried the river's memory inland start to sip from the bottom, the way a stream will dream of stillness long before it actually stops moving. Farmers come each spring to clear them, but each year there is a little more to clear, and a little less reason. The children of those farmers grow up knowing both the shovel and the waiting. Somewhere in this long turning, the calendar of floods loses its grip on everything. The months had been named for the river's moods, swelling, receding, planting, harvest. And for 1,000 years, those names were the only names a season needed. But now the names outlast the moods, tenderness that belongs to things no longer present in the room. Villages that once stood knee-deep in silt find themselves sitting on old mounds of it, raised above the plain by centuries of deposit. The mud of 100 floods has become stone hard underfoot. Children run across it without knowing they are running across time, that beneath their bare feet are layers of harvest and ceremony, the pressed grain of seasons beyond counting. The desert does not hurry. It never has. It simply continues to be what it always was, patient and golden and very wide. But the boundary that once seemed sharp and clear green light on one side, pale sand on the other, begins to soften. A field abandoned for a few seasons becomes a field half-claimed. In another decade, it is indistinguishable from the surrounding silence. The sand does not conquer so much as it accepts, taking in what the water has left behind, covering it with a fine and slow breath. You notice it first in the smaller places. A village that once sat flush against the floodplain finds its western lanes filling with blown grit. Doorways are swept in the morning and filled again by afternoon. The sand is not unkind. It is simply constant. It arrives from a long way away, carried on winds that have crossed distances no one in the village has ever walked, and it settles here among the whitewashed walls as if it is always meant to rest. In just this place, new people bring new words for old things. The river keeps its own name in their mouths, because some names are too deep to replace. But the prayers that rise above it change their sound. The calls that drift across the morning air are long and clean and open-voweled, shaped for carrying across great distance. They settle over the water the way light settles, without weight, without hurry. The river accepts them. It has accepted everything offered to it. Mosques rise where temples once stood, not always, not everywhere, but in the way of all living places, where stone is already dressed and waiting. Builders begin. Old carvings on the walls of older rooms are painted over with whitewash, and then with script, and then with more whitewash, each layer adding its quiet over the last. Nothing is entirely erased. Each thing simply becomes a foundation for what follows. You imagine being a bird crossing the valley in those centuries of slow change. Below you, the river still runs, because the river always runs. But the fields are pale at the margins, the channels fewer, the villages smaller in some places and larger in others. New towns grow along the old routes, because the routes themselves are permanent, worn into the land by the simple arithmetic of people going from one good place to another. The language of the land shifts like sand shifts, a grain at a time, then a dune. The old tongue does not vanish on a particular day. It fades the way color fades in cloth left in a sunny doorway, so gradually that no one moment is the moment of its going. By the time it is gone, no one is sure when it left. Its sound remains in place names, in the names of the months that outlasted their seasons, in certain words that moved into the new language and stayed there wearing slightly different clothes, but carrying the same quiet weight. Camels become more common than cattle along the desert roads. Their footfalls are soft on sand, their breathing measured, their patience remarkable. They carry salt and linen and small precious things across distances that would have seemed impossible to those first farmers who never walked beyond the valley's green arms. The trade routes thicken, and along them move not just goods, but habits, recipes, colors, and songs that no one planned to share, but that found their way across nevertheless. The sand remembers the flood in its own way. Deep beneath the dunes that have wandered in from the west, there are layers of old silk, river dark and fine, pressed by time into something almost like marble. It is the flood made permanent. The desert holds it carefully, the way you hold a letter from someone you once loved, close and still, tucked somewhere near where your quiet lies. The Nile does not mourn what has changed. It continues its annual effort, still carrying its load of dark silk from the highlands far to the south, still staining the sea at its mouth, a particular shade of brown that sailors have used to find their way home for longer than memory reaches. It gives what it gives. It asks for nothing in return. And you, drifting through all of this from a great soft distance, feel the centuries settling over you the way sand settles, lightly, without pressure, one fine grain at a time. The river is still running somewhere beneath this quiet. The old silk is still there, deep and dark, full of seeds that never grew, but never entirely gave up. The desert is still patient, still wide, still golden in the long afternoon of a day no one remembers beginning. You are resting now inside that patience. You are breathing at the pace of something very old and very calm. There is a particular stillness that comes when something very old finally finishes its long work. You can feel it now, drifting in that comfortable space between wakefulness and sleep, as another layer of Egypt settles softly over you. It is the middle of the 20th century. The desert is as old as it has ever been. The Nile runs south to north, as it always has, carrying its blue light through sandstone cliffs and date palm palms and wide brown floodplains. But something is changing slowly in the stone heart of Nubia. Workers have come to a place called Aswan. They have come from many countries, speaking many languages. There are Egyptian engineers in dust-covered boots, Soviet advisors with rolled-up blueprints, Nubian laborers who have known this stretch of river all their lives. They are building something enormous, something the world has never quite attempted here before. They are building a wall across the Nile itself. You imagine it taking shape gradually over years, block by block, pour by pour, concrete mixed and laid in the desert heat, cranes moving slowly against a sky so blue it seems painted. The dam grows taller through one season and then another, a gray, impatient form rising from the canyon walls. It is not a beautiful thing, not in the way the old monuments were beautiful, but it carries a different kind of grandeur, quiet and functional, a monument to a new kind of dreaming. At its peak, tens of thousands of people are working on it, yet the canyon holds them all with a strange, quiet dignity. The cliffs listen. The river waits. Each evening the workers leave their tools and go to their camps, and for a few hours the construction site breathes in the dark. Dust settling on concrete, a single lamp burning in an engineer's tent. Those brief nights must have felt immense. All that ambition at rest. By the middle of 1970, it is done. You picture the engineers standing at its crest, looking north at the river below. The Nile there is calm, controlled, its old wildness held in place. And behind them, to the south, a lake is forming. A vast, slow, turquoise silence spreading across what was once riverbed and canyon and sandbar. Lake Nasser, they will call it, and it will grow until it stretches nearly 500 kilometers into the Sudanese desert. The villages of the Nubian people have already been moved. Whole communities carried gently to higher ground, to new houses on new streets. The old homes are somewhere beneath the water now. Chimneys and door frames and courtyard walls resting in the lake's deep blue quiet. The water holds them, the way sleep holds a memory, loosely, without effort. A minaret might stand in the shallows, just visible at low water, catching the afternoon light, and then the lake rises further and covers it completely, and the light moves on. Nubian families sit on the porches of their new homes in the evenings and watch the sunset color the western cliffs in amber and rose. They carry their songs and their cooking and their particular way of weaving cloth into a new century. The old world lives in them, carried forward in children's names and lullabies, and the particular tilt of a doorframe they rebuilt from memory. The great temple Ancient colossi cut apart and lifted, stone by stone, up the cliff face and reassembled on higher ground. Workers numbered each block like the pieces of a puzzle. Abu Simbel rose again, exactly as it had been, but above the waterline now, looking out over a lake that had not existed in any pharaoh's imagination. There is something tender in that. All that effort simply to preserve something, to carry it forward into a world it was never built for. You let that thought drift through you like something released. Below the dam, the Nile changes. You can feel the difference even at this distance, even from the comfortable edge of sleep. The water that continues north is steadier, bluer, cooler. It no longer carries the dark, rich sediment that once made the black land. It no longer rises in August and falls in October and leaves its gift of silk on the waiting fields. For the first time in all the long history we have been traveling through tonight, the flood does not come. Farmers check irrigation schedules now instead of watching the horizon. Children grow up beside a river that does not change color with the seasons. Cotton grows in fields fed by canals around, and electric lights come on at dusk in villages that once burned oil lamps. These are not small things. They are the ordinary miracles of an era arriving, settling in, becoming the new everyday. But something ancient has also gone quiet. That annual exhalation, that great rise and fall that once set the pace for everything, for planting and harvesting and religious calendars and royal ceremonies, has given way to something steadier and more silent. The Nile breathes differently now. It breathes without urgency. A long, deep, even breath. You breathe that way too. Your chest rises slowly. Your shoulders settle further. Egypt is settling around you like fine dust after a long day softly, without resistance. Lake Nasser catches the stars. You can see it from very high up if you let your imagination rise for just a moment. A long blue mirror in the desert, smooth and luminous. Fishermen cross it at dawn in low boats, their nets folded in the stern. Herons stand at the water's edge where the desert meets the lake in a thin, bright line. There is a stillness there that feels earned, that feels old, even though the lake itself is new. The desert has always known how to be quiet. And now the water has learned it too. The Nile continues north, past Luxor, past Cairo, past the broad green mouth where it opens into the sea. But its old insistence is gone. It moves with a kind of acceptance now, measured and unhurried. A river that has finally made peace with the century it finds itself in. All along its banks in the blue early morning, Bread is baking in clay ovens. Dogs sleep in doorways. Pigeons circle a minaret once, twice, and land. Somewhere a child is still sleeping, nested in white cotton, dreaming of nothing in particular. You feel yourself moving toward that kind of sleep. Everything you have seen tonight is settling into its place. The first seeds pressed into wet black earth. The limestone dust on a builder's hands. The torch guttering in a temple corridor. The creak of a water lift in the afternoon. The sand covering everything slowly, patiently. The engineers and their blueprints. The lake rising over the quiet old world. All of it is behind you now. Ahead, there is only the blue stillness of the lake. The stars above it, very far and very steady. The soft electric glow on the far shore. A heron lifting from the water's edge and gliding out over the dark surface in a long, unhurried arc. You close your eyes. The lake is still. The desert is still. The Nile, somewhere north of here, is moving through the dark in its new, quiet way. And you are still too.